Ever wonder what connects that cup of coffee you had to, like, a rainforest halfway around the world? Get ready to dive into the world of ecosystems. Today, we're going to be exploring that web of life, the one that keeps us all going. We've got some incredible research lined up here. We're talking about cutting-edge reports on deforestation, deep dives into those unsung heroes of our planet, the ones we don't always think about,
Yeah.
but that keep things ticking. And to help us unpack all of this and figure out why it even matters is our resident expert on, well, everything ecosystems. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Always love a good chat about these natural systems and why we should all care about them.
So ecosystems, when we throw that word around, what are we even talking about?
So, at its core, an ecosystem is basically a community, right? It's all these living things,
Yeah.
plants, animals, the whole gang, interacting with each other and, of course, with their environment.
Okay, so it's like more than just a bunch of plants and animals hanging out in the same place.
Exactly. It's about the relationships, the connections, the way they depend on each other.
Got it. Got it. So like kind of how different departments in a company rely on each other then.
Yeah, you could think of it like that. And just like in a company, if one part starts messing up, the whole system feels it.
Makes sense. So let's dive into some real-world examples. Our sources mention rainforests, those lush, vibrant places, and then coral reefs. Totally different vibe. What makes each of those ecosystems so special, so unique, and what's their role in this whole, like, grand web of life?
Well, they're both kind of like the celebrities of the natural world, right? Each one has its own claim to fame. Rainforests, for example, they're bursting with life. We call that biodiversity.
Hmm.
And crucially, they're vital for regulating the entire planet's climate. They're like giant sponges soaking up that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Right, like the lungs of the planet, right? I've heard that one before. And what about coral reefs? They're just mesmerizing underwater cities teeming with all those crazy creatures.
Oh, yeah. Coral reefs are fascinating. They might cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, but get this. They support something like 25% of all marine life.
Wait, seriously?
Oh, yeah.
25%?
Yep. It's like this bustling underwater metropolis providing food, shelter, you name it. Crucial for healthy oceans.
Well, it's a lot riding on them.
It is, and it's not just about the fish and other marine life. They matter to us humans, too.
How so?
Well, they act as natural barriers, protecting coastlines from storms and erosion. Plus, they support livelihoods through fishing and tourism.
Okay, so we've got these incredible ecosystems working hard both on land and underwater, keeping our planet healthy, giving us all these essential services. But, and there's always a but, these ecosystems are facing some, let's say, challenges. And our sources don't sugarcoat it.
No, they don't. One of the biggest warning signs is that we're losing these vital ecosystems at an alarming rate.
And it's not just about losing those picture-perfect landscapes, right?
Not at all. These losses, they have a domino effect, impacting everything. The air we breathe, the food we eat.
Yeah, our sources really drive that point home.
They have to. Let's take rainforests again as an example. Did you know we're losing an area the size of a football field every minute because of deforestation?
A football field every single minute. That's just, I can't even wrap my head around that. What does that kind of loss actually mean in the grand scheme of things?
It's devastating, and not just for the, let's be honest, countless species who call those forests home. This impacts the entire planet.
How so?
Well, forests act like these massive carbon sinks, right? They pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which is what we need. But when we chop them down, we're not just releasing all that stored carbon back into the air.
Oh.
We're also cutting down our planet's ability to, well, clean up future emissions.
So it's a double whammy for climate change,
Yeah,
basically.
pretty much. And it makes you think about all those incredible creatures losing their homes in the process, too.
It does, it does.
And that brings us to another crucial concept, biodiversity.
Biodiversity. We hear that word all the time, but it's kind of like easy to tune out,
Yeah, it's true.
So why should people actually care about biodiversity? Break it down for us.
All right, well, think of biodiversity like the foundation of life on Earth, all the living things from those tiny insects you mentioned to like the biggest whales, every single thing.
So it's more than just like how many different species are out there.
That's right. It's about how they all fit together.
Got it. So biodiversity equals a more resilient ecosystem?
Exactly.
Okay, but like, what does that actually look like? How does it play out in the real world?
Well, think about a rainforest, right? A rainforest with a ton of biodiversity is way better equipped to handle things like pests, diseases.
Because if one type of tree gets wiped out,
Right, there are others ready to step in so you don't get this domino effect that could honestly collapse the whole system.
it's kind of like how if you put all your money in one stock and the market crashes, you're in trouble.
Exactly.
But if your investments are diverse, you're more protected.
Exactly. And it's not just about those far-off rainforests. This is relevant to all of us.
How's
Think about your next meal. Biodiversity is essential for things like pollination, keeping those pesky pests in check, and, healthy soil. Without a good mix of insects, birds, even microorganisms, our entire food system is at risk.
Okay, so maybe no more coffee if we don't get this right.
Or chocolate.
Yeah, that's a biodiversity crisis I can get behind preventing.
Yeah.
But on a serious note, it is mind-blowing when you think about how connected everything really is. Speaking of connections, let's talk about wildlife. Our sources really emphasize that it's not just about saving those cute and cuddly animals that get all the attention.
You're right.
So every species has its purpose.
Every single one. From those majestic elephants to even like dung beetles.
Dung beetles?
Even dung beetles, they're essential.
Okay, I gotta ask, what vital role does the dung beetle play? I'm having a hard time picturing it.
All right, well, they may not be winning any popularity contests, but those dung beetles are like the unsung heroes of nutrient cycling. By doing their thing, burying dung, they're actually fertilizing the soil, improving its structure,
Yep.
even helping to reduce the spread of diseases.
Who knew? Dung beetles, the ultimate recyclers.
They're amazing. And it's not just about keeping those ecosystems healthy. Wildlife also plays a direct role in our human lives. Think about the cultural significance of animals, like how they inspire our art, our stories, even our spirituality.
Right.
And then there are the economic benefits, things like ecotourism, sustainable fishing. All of those industries rely on healthy wildlife populations.
Okay, so we've established that ecosystems are these complex webs of life. We've got biodiversity acting like a safety net, and then wildlife playing all these critical roles, some more glamorous than others.
Right.
But as we've been hinting at, there are some pretty serious threats to these systems. And our sources, they don't shy away from the harsh realities here.
Yeah, and it's key to understand that these threats, they're not happening in isolation, They're all intertwined, often feeding off each other.
Like a domino effect, right?
Okay.
One problem creates another. And it just keeps going. It's kind of overwhelming to think about it all on a global scale.
It can be.
But let's try to break it down step by step. Our sources highlight a few main culprits: deforestation, the illegal wildlife trade, and of course climate change. So let's start with deforestation. We talked about it earlier with the rainforests. But this is happening everywhere, right?
It is.
Why is it such a big problem?
Well, for starters, forests are being cleared at an alarming rate globally, and it's not just for one reason.
Like what?
Agriculture, logging, mining, and even just like sprawling cities, all of that eats into forests.
And with each acre of forest that disappears,
You lose biodiversity, carbon sequestration, all those vital services.
it's heartbreaking, really, when you think about those ancient forests disappearing. And it's not just the trees themselves, it's the domino effect.
Yes.
What does that look like?
Well, when you clear forests, you fragment habitats. It makes it way harder for wildlife to find food, water, even mates. And then you get disruptions in water cycles, soil erosion, flooding, in some cases even desertification.
Wow.
It's all connected.
And speaking of interconnected threats, our sources don't hold back on the illegal wildlife trade. It's easy to feel helpless against something so massive, driven by, greed, demand for luxury goods.
Right.
Where do we even start to tackle something like that?
Well, it's complex for sure. You've got poverty, corruption, and this global demand for exotic pets, those status symbol luxury items, even ingredients for traditional medicine.
So what can be done? What's the game plan?
Well, you got to tackle it from all angles, right?
Huh?
On the ground, that means tougher law enforcement, breaking up those trafficking networks, and of course, protecting those habitats.
So less opportunity for poachers to do their thing.
Exactly. But then there's the demand side.
Right. Convincing people not to buy those products in the first place.
It's about education, awareness. When people really get it, when they understand the impact of their choices, that's when things start to shift.
Totally. So it's like even that souvenir you buy on vacation,
Right.
it could be contributing to the problem.
Exactly. And we can't talk about interconnected threats without talking about climate change. It's not just some future problem. It's already messing with ecosystems and wildlife populations everywhere.
Yeah, it's like every day there's a new headline. Glaciers melting, crazy weather events, animals struggling to adapt.
All right.
It can feel pretty overwhelming. So our sources, what are they saying about the biggest ways climate change is messing with ecosystems?
Well, one of the most worrying things is how it's throwing off that natural balance, like those finely tuned relationships between species. Take rising temperatures, for example.
Okay.
That alone can mess up the timing of, well, everything.
Like what?
Plant and animal life cycles.
Oh, I see.
Birds might migrate earlier, flowers could bloom at the wrong time.
Things get out of sync.
Exactly. And then some species just can't find the resources they need to survive.
It's like someone sped up nature's clock, and not everything can keep up.
That's a good way to put it. One really stark example is what's happening with coral reefs.
Right, those underwater cities.
Corals are super sensitive to changes in water temperature, and as the oceans are getting warmer, we're seeing more and more coral bleaching.
Coral bleaching, yeah, I've seen the pictures. It's like they lose all their color.
They do, and it's not just cosmetic. Basically, the corals get stressed, they expel the algae living inside them, which is what gives them their color, and, importantly, a lot of their nutrients.
So they're more vulnerable.
Totally.
Yeah.
More susceptible to diseases, even death.
That's really sad, actually. It's like a whole ecosystem being drained of its vibrancy.
It is, and it highlights how all these threats, warming oceans, ocean acidification, rising sea levels, they all work together to push these ecosystems to their limits.
Okay, so I'm getting a little, what's the word, eco-anxiety here. But our sources keep mentioning wildlife conservation as a sort of beacon of hope. So what does that even mean, like practically speaking?
It's about taking action on multiple levels. It's about protecting and restoring habitats, of course, but it also means addressing those root causes we've been talking about.
Like climate change, unsustainable ways of living.
Exactly. It's about figuring out how humans can coexist, truly coexist, with nature in a way that benefits everyone.
I love that. So it's more than just like putting a fence around a forest and saying, nobody touch.
Right. It's bigger than that. It's about individuals, communities, organizations, governments, all working together.
It's a tall order.
It is, but there are success stories out there.
Okay.
Things that give us hope. One of the most effective strategies is creating protected areas like national parks and wildlife reserves.
Right. Give those ecosystems a break. So like those no-take zones they've established in some parts of the ocean
Exactly.
to give the fish a chance to, repopulate.
Yeah, it's about giving nature a chance to, well, do its thing. And one really cool example, it's become kind of a classic conservation case study, is the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone back in the 90s.
Oh, yeah. I think I read about that. Remind me what happened.
So wolves had been hunted to almost extinction in Yellowstone. And it turns out that had a huge ripple effect on the whole ecosystem.
Like what?
Well, without the wolves, the elk population went unchecked.
Makes sense.
And all those elk, they were overgrazing, which had a negative impact on the vegetation, which then affected other species.
A whole chain reaction.
Right, so they reintroduced wolves.
Yeah.
And it worked. The wolves helped regulate the elk population, which allowed the vegetation to recover, which then had a positive impact on a whole bunch of other species.
So the wolves brought back the balance, like ecological superheroes.
That's a great way to put it. It just shows you how resilient nature can be if we give it a fighting chance.
That's encouraging, at least. But protected areas, those can't be the only solution, right? What about everywhere else where humans are, like, constantly interacting with nature?
You're raising a really important point, and that's where the idea of sustainable development comes in.
Sustainable development, right?
Basically, it's about finding ways to meet our needs as humans without trashing the planet for everyone else.
So changing the way we do things, fundamentally.
Yeah, from the way we grow our food to the products we buy, even just the way we get around.
So what does that look like in practice? Give me some examples.
All right, let's take agriculture. There's a big push for more regenerative farming practices.
Okay, what does that even mean?
Basically, it's about working with nature, not against it. Things like planting cover crops to protect the soil, rotating crops, cutting back on those chemical pesticides.
So it's better for the environment and probably produces healthier food too, right?
Exactly.
What about fishing? Because our oceans are taking a beating from overfishing, pollution, all of that.
Totally. Sustainable fishing is crucial. Things like setting catch limits based on science, using fishing gear that doesn't accidentally scoop up everything else in the ocean.
Right, like those huge nets that just indiscriminately catch everything.
And establishing marine protected areas, those no-take zones we talked about, to allow fish populations to recover.
It's amazing, though, how much progress is being made when we actually prioritize both human needs and the environment. But it also makes you realize we all have a role to play, right? It can feel overwhelming, though. Like, what can I, as one person, actually do?
It's all about those individual actions adding up, trust me. And your choices as a consumer, they speak volumes. Supporting businesses and products that are doing things right, that's huge.
Yeah. Like looking for those certifications, right?
Yes. You'll see things like the Forest Stewardship Council label the FSC on wood and paper products. That tells you it's from a responsible managed forest.
I've also been trying to cut back on my plastic use.
Huge one. Reducing single-use plastic, that's something everyone can do.
What about those reusable bags at the grocery store?
Love it. And while you're there, consider buying locally sourced seasonal produce whenever possible.
Okay, yeah. Supports local farmers, too.
Exactly. And it cuts down on the emissions from transporting food all over the place.
It's about thinking about those impacts,
Yeah.
right? Where our food comes from, how it's produced.
Exactly. And honestly, just being mindful of your overall consumption. We live in a world where we're constantly told to buy more, but sometimes the most sustainable option is to simply buy less.
Less, but better, right? Quality over quantity.
I love that.
What about reducing our carbon footprint? Any tips there? Sometimes it feels like such a big, abstract thing.
Well, transportation is a huge contributor to those greenhouse gases.
Okay, so how do we fix that?
Think about walking, biking, carpooling, or taking public transportation more often. Every little bit helps.
And if you have to drive, electric or hybrid vehicles are becoming more and more common.
Exactly. And don't underestimate those small changes around the house either. Things like switching to energy-efficient appliances, LED light bulbs. It all adds up.
Right, those small changes, if enough of us make them, they really can make a difference.
They can.
Okay, so we've talked about being mindful consumers, watching our carbon footprint. What about directly supporting conservation organizations?
Absolutely. There are some incredible organizations doing really important work, from protecting endangered species to restoring those degraded ecosystems to, fighting for stronger environmental policies, donating to them, volunteering your time. That's huge.
Even just staying informed, learning as much as we can, and then sharing that knowledge with others.
Yes. Knowledge is power, but only if we use it and share it.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap things up. It's been, well, let's just say, a very thought-provoking deep dive. So, to our listeners, we hope you learned something new today, and more importantly, that you feel inspired to get involved. Whether it's making more conscious choices in your daily life or supporting those organizations on the front lines, every action counts. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the incredible world of ecosystems and wildlife conservation.